Oh, all right, number 4. So I got into a heck of a discussion today. It was among a couple of different people, mainly all in the creative sector, and we spoke about the whole concept of the 2-week notice. I'm going to be careful about this. I got I got some good advice from a few people to be careful what companies I'm naming, because you never know if somebody gets crazy with litigation, libel, or that aspect. Even though I can prove every instance that I'll be talking about, I'm going to be careful and use code names for things. But if you've read previous social media or my freaking resume, you'll understand where and how and all that other stuff. I can only think of a couple places that I ever gave. Actually, I take that back. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, there are a couple places that I did give 2 weeks notice, and they weren't in the creative sector or area. One of them was a cattle ranch I worked on back when I was still in high school. And then there's been a couple of other places that I worked where I was like, I'll be leaving in 2 weeks or something. And it's interesting that it was almost more the blue collar work sort of stuff that I did, that I was more concerned with leaving a 2 weeks notice. The moment that I transpired into any of the areas that were, well, unless it was a smaller design firm or something like that, for the most part, and this is the weird thing. So, you know what? Let me just back up and start off with a couple things. So, the very first place that I worked at is no longer around. So I don't even feel remotely bad talking about this. That was one where I got let go because I had spoken up a little bit too much, and I clashed with the person who was in charge. I don't know that he was actually considered the CEO. It was this dude named Jim Lepore, who at first I think we got along okay, and then as things went on, it wasn't so great. And I still keep in touch with a lot of the people I used to work with from that place. But long story short, no, that was one where when I was let go from there, it was the first real strike that hit me that, okay, I just lost a job that I was drawing for a living, that I was illustrating. And after I think it was there maybe about a year and a half, something like that. It was so long ago, I don't even include it on my resume. And the company doesn't even exist. After I left, the company got downsized and downsized and downsized until finally they were sold off to another company called Aero Gaming, and the assets and the people working for it were all transferred over to that one. And in that case, that was my first real shock of reality as to how corporate America could kind of work. I remember being led into the room and being told, hey, unfortunately, we feel like, there's just been some miscommunication on how we work here and the respect and all those other things. There was a lot of stuff that just kind of flew over my head. I was just sitting there, okay, I'm going to get talked to, and then I go back to my desk, kind of, tail tucked between my legs and lick my wounds, and I'll be fine. And then somehow I clicked back in whenever they were like, and so because of that, your termination will be effective immediately. And then it was funny because Jim Lepore had a guy that worked for him, real tall guy that was big dude, towered over me. He was going to escort me back to my desk. And I was like, oh my God, this is like shit I've seen in the movies. Understand, this is my first real pro job. And prior to this, it had always been like these little part-time jobs, working at Little Caesars, cattle farm, cattle ranch, places like that, off and on, not much more. I'd done a multitude of smaller little weird jobs. And I remember being taken back because the way Geroda was set up, it was a big manufacturing plant. I remember there were off to the side, there were these massive printers, for gang runs and stuff like that. We were all set up, and if my memory serves me right, and I don't even have photos from this back then, I don't think I do. There was one or two mobile homes that were in the inside of the actual work area, and we were in there. It was air conditioned, it was nice. So during the summer, like, the rest of the building was just terrible. And we manufactured these pull tab ticket kind of games. So we had to do illustrations, and it was for different companies and, like small promotional aspects. VFWs would get a hold of us, like the Moose and the Elks Lodge, I think, things like that. We did. And so the whole concept was you'd make illustrations that fit within these pre-formatted games, and you had to make the symbols certain ways and stuff. And then a lot of that became sort of automated. And then there were other games called SciText that were like little bitmappy things. Anyway, I'm getting off the point. The fact is, that was the very first job that I ended up getting the boot at. And so I remember walking out and everything, and I thought, oh my God, I never want to go through that again. Man, famous fucking last words. So after that, and this is where my history gets a little muddled. I know that I've got it all written down, but man, after so many jobs, it just kind of gets mixed up. And all this time, I had still had this idea that I was going to go work at the card factory. And I ended up in a couple of different places, some different design firms that I went in and interviewed at. The weird part is, and this is completely honest, I mean, if anyone ever has questions, just reach out to me. I'll tell you the whole thing, uncensored. And I mean, there has been some crazy shit that I have been through over the years. So this is kind of cathartic for me. One design studio I worked for is also no longer around. In fact, when I got hired, they were doing pretty good, but it was right in the middle of whenever people were starting to get more access to the Adobe software. There was a turn where people were like, well, we got to kind of save money, and we're going to start, like, I have a secretary, I'm going to teach her this particular software or whatever. And I remember that we were starting to lose clients and things, and we were making a shift over into creating something of a multimedia effort. And it was a really weird and dodgy time. I was still very young, and I worked there with a couple of people. Some of them I still keep in touch with. And we really pushed forward into the area where I was still doing some of the design work along with the owner. And then we had one or two other people that were involved that were helping kind of, accommodate and push forward this whole effort to make a television pilot. And a novel and all these other things. It's actually, there's a Superman pen up here that I had gotten, and I'm always really weird about like name dropping people. So that's a story for another time, because it's actually connected in a different way. But the point is, I got a chance to really know a lot of people and meet a lot of people that were really, fuck it, I'm going to say it. Paul Kupperberg, who's worked on, the Archie Andrews series and a ton of other books. That's just the first one that comes to mind. I had met him there. He was such a grand fellow. Took his time. In fact, I need to remember to reach out to him, just say, hey, how's it been? Don't know if you remember me. Remember the Superman pen you took off of your leather bag and you gave me? And it's just this little die-cast Superman pen that I've never taken out of the case once I put it back in there. Just I never want to lose that. Well, that job in particular, we went through all these things. And when I say we, the collective of people there, even though through a lot of arguing and fighting and dissonance and the whole thing, it ended up being that we didn't really realize we were careening out of control. And a pilot for this does exist. So the television show we were opting to put out was it exists. You can find it on YouTube, at least the trailer of it from what I remember. I think the actual whole episode 1 is now private. But I have a few copies of it on DVD. And there have been times when I've thought about like just uploading it, but it's not my intellectual property. I don't even think the intellectual property exists. I'm not saying it's public domain, but the trailer exists out there. It's called Lenny and Cheryl. And there are times whenever I think that was a fever dream. And the whole thing that happened there was, as the company went along, people got let go, infighting happened, lots of bad things. And there are times when I really hope and wish that the owner will someday tell the story of what happened in that small design studio in Independence, Missouri. Because it was nuts. I mean, really crazy nuts. And I mean, it really would not, I'm not even joking when I say it would make a really good miniseries. Just the behind the scenes of what happened, all the people that got involved, and all the things that transpired. And there's a few people here in the city that still remember all that stuff. But all of us, we went through this thing, and many of us got let go. And some of us unceremoniously so. I was one of the last ones left over. And finally, I remember being pulled in a meeting. And this was another circumstance where I was ride or die. I was going to stay with this company. We had these envisioned ideas that we were going to be like the next Walt Disney Studios. And that's something that kind of drives me crazy here in this town, especially because, Walt Disney does have a foundational start in Kansas City. So a lot of times whenever anything creative starts, they always talk about like, oh, Walt Disney started here. No shit. Okay, that doesn't mean that doesn't mean we're gonna survive or do anything great. You're just calling it out because everyone loves to say it. It's like, I don't know. It's a weird fucking thing about Kansas City. That's a whole nother video. But so we end up. I'm out of a job because basically my boss called me in and said, I can only afford to pay you for like another month, and in that time, I'd like you to help me back up some stuff, and work on a few projects, close them up, and then when you're done, and you can start taking your stuff home and everything. I had a really nice freaking. I mean, it was the first time that I thought, okay, I'm here to stay. I bought a rug. I brought in a stereo. I had like bookshelves and shit. It looked like a dorm room. It was insane. I know I have photos of that somewhere because I used to stay late nights and record. I was working on music back then, after hours, and just working on projects, all kinds of shit. And I was also rebuilding my website. And so I was all in at that place. And that was the last place I worked where I'm like, I'm putting my all into it, because it was heartbreaking, right? Like, finally, it turned out, no, these novels weren't going to go anywhere. No, the pilot didn't work out. No, there was no other options. And again, that whole scenario is going to be another video down the road when I talk about investing your time and everything into something. So that was 2 strikes where I was like, I never even got a chance to put in 2 weeks notice on these. The companies literally went under. So then I remember the first real shock that I had was a company that, if you know, I never talk about this company very much. I worked there for 3 days, and I'll give you the highlight reel. Basically, when you work for this company, you are working on videos. At least I think they still are now too. I used to see this job listing that would pop up all the time. It was for a videographer doing video editing and Adobe Premiere, all this other stuff. They were willing to train, and the concept was you would get paid X amount of dollars yearly. And if you lasted 6 months, you got a bonus. Or either that or it was at the end of the year. You got like, I'm not even joking, I think it was a $10,000 bonus. And I thought that was really weird because the starting pay was like 21 grand or something for a full-time job doing video editing. Now, this is some years back, but still, that's pretty shitty pay. And but I took it. I didn't have any other option. I went in, and okay, so this I got to go into depth with, because hopefully this will help some people out there. Learn what a red flag is, and then run the fuck away from it. Here's how it goes. So I went in, and I remember interviewing, and I thought, okay, I wonder where this is. The place of employment. And I have no problem if you work out of home. I fucking do. But I went to this place. I was like, where the fuck am I? I'm driving around. I'm like, no, seriously, I'm like in a suburban, nice area. I get out and I'm like, oh, maybe I'm just meeting the person at their home, right? Maybe that's not uncommon. I didn't know. Now I know. I'm like, stranger danger shit. Well, I went up to the door, and this guy comes to the front door, and he's like, hey, are you Feliciano Mora? And I'm like, I am. And says, well, come on in. Let me let's have an interview upstairs. So we go upstairs. We're sitting in this kitchen. He offers me some water and everything else like that. And it was like, this is really weird. But I didn't think anything about it. And I was like, okay. And he starts talking about his office and his place and everything else like that. And I was like, all right, cool. And he's like, well, you ready to go and see it? I'm like, yeah, sure. So I started getting ready. You know, when you get ready, like you think you're about to go somewhere, like, oh, I'm about to have 5 minutes of driving. I got to work up some conversation, some small talk, pretend that I fucking care about the Kansas City Chiefs, something like that. And nope. Walked down the stairs, went around the corner. Boom, we're in the basement. There is a massive oak desk. Big ass presidential thing. That's his desk. There's like a hutch. And when I mean a hutch, I'm talking like one of the kind that like you see like Ebenezer Scrooge would have had. Some shit like that, like folded. It wasn't even a real desk, but it was here. and there was a woman sitting there kind of hunched over. That was his secretary. You turn the corner into the rest of what I realized was just a family room. And there's like this super high octane powered Mac sitting by itself. And I was like, ooh, maybe that's my desk. No, it's two other little Macs down at the end, which is fine. And both of those had, do you guys remember what wall units are? Like that was all the rage, like in the 80s and 70s and shit. It's like three big centerpiece things that you put in your living room and you put more shit in them. Those desks look like that. Everything was oak and mahogany. It was like rich oak and mahogany. It was the weirdest thing. And I was like, this is really weird. And I remember it didn't hit me until we sat down and he introduced me to one lady who was doing some video editing. And then he introduced me to the secretary, who we had promptly just walked by and then came back around. And he basically showed me what was going on. And then he started going into this spiel about how, like, if you work here, you can write off your cable, you can write off your phone, you can write off all this other stuff because, we do commercials here and you can use that as research and all this other stuff. I'm like, And I'm one of those people that if you assault me with a whole bunch of information, nothing's staying. It's just not. Unless it's something really fucking cool. Like if you come at me and you're like, would you believe what Lego got released? Or have you seen this adorable baby panda? Those are the kinds of subject matter I'm going to listen to. Otherwise, I'm notorious for recording meetings a lot of times because I need to go back later, completely decompress in the vehicle and go, what the fuck was just said in there? Because I don't know. I'm terrible at writing notes because everyone else just talks so fast and I'm like, I can't. I'm not blaming anyone for that. Great, fantastic. I'm just not good at it, so I have to record shit. So in this case, this was not during my recording times, but I'm like sitting in there, I'm like, is this an interview or what the hell is this? Do I have the job? And he talks to me for a while and explains everything else like that. Everyone's real friendly and everything else like that. And you know how when you meet people and they're in a certain mood and then later you see that same mood and you go, oh, you're faking. You're faking. Great. It didn't dawn on me. So we're sitting down there and he's like, if you take the job, this is kind of how it is. It's going to be $21K a year. If you last, oh yeah, that's right. If you last 12 months, I remember he didn't even say it was a year. It was just these weird measurements. It's kind of like when somebody tells you their baby is 36 months old, like I want to say that I'm like 2,734 months old too. I don't know why. It's a pet peeve of mine. But when he said that, I'm like, that sounds really fucking long. Like a year is like completely fine. The moment you hear anything more than that, you're like, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. So it turned into this whole thing where there was little voices in the back of my head going, don't fucking stay here, fucking run. And I didn't. I was like, I need a job because I have bills. I have things I want to buy. And I want to eat. So, take the job. And I expected, I was like, okay, cool. So, come back tomorrow? No, go ahead. Sit at the desk. I was like, okay. And I trained with the other lady there for a little while. And then it hit me. So, the monitors, he could see what you were looking at. There was no time for bullshit of looking or taking a break. This is pre-social media, really. I think MySpace was a thing, but that was about it. Couldn't be on that. If you were sitting at the desk, you had to do it. You had to be at work. And he always used to run around and yell this fucking annoying thing over, tag it and bag it. And it was basically where you'd get a video clip. And from what I recall, he only really had one goddamn client. And that dude was an asshole too. But we always had, the lady that was training me was showing me kind of how Premiere worked. And I didn't know shit about it at the time. Now, some years later, out of necessity and because, I don't know, I wanted to, I've learned it. But back then it was like really rushed, I'm like, oh God. I'm trying to pick up and learn things like that. And I worked on editing some stuff, but the point was the whole job was just a terrible fit. And then that was Monday. And I remember I left there and I'm like, I don't know if this is right. Like, this is weird. And it's just a really weird feeling. And there was something about that. I mean, don't get me wrong. If somebody has a small business, like if I had an assistant that I hired, they're not fucking working here in my studio. I'm gonna go find somewhere else. And at that point, I can afford to bring somebody in. That's my own personal preference. But when I was there, I can understand that people have their businesses at home and they'll work on them, and that's fine. But this was a weird circumstance where I felt like, you ever go to those restaurants where you go in and you feel like you're ordering like a plate of food in somebody's living room? It is like the weirdest freaking feeling on the planet. That is exactly how this felt. And I thought to myself, I don't need this shit. But again, I was like, give it a shot. Just go with it. No need to worry. Yeah. So Tuesday came, and I had forgotten promptly until I was almost to work. See, during the interview, he dropped this little nugget of knowledge. I don't really trust people, so what I need you to do is I need you to go ahead and bring some nice clothing to work with you. This has not changed since 1983. I am a scruffy motherfucker. I love hoodies. I love hats. I've always had long hair. I don't own a suit. Period. And I don't care if I ever do. So I've attended a funeral in this. I don't give a fuck. I don't consider that disrespectful. They're dead. So I was like, what? He was like, yeah, you gotta bring some stuff. And and this is where it got really great. He was like, your church clothing could work. And I was like, I don't go to church. What? No. I was like, I'm not going to get into it, but no, I'm not a religious dude. Not by any stretch of the imagination. And, it's certainly not an organized religion. I don't do that. And he said, so you don't have like a suit and tie? You don't at least have a nice shirt and a tie? I was like, no. Well, I don't normally do this, but, I can advance you on your pay, and then you can go ahead and just pay me back out of that check. And that was the weirdest way to say that, right? And I thought, no, man, I'm good. I'll figure that out. And so that was the first real brusque element we had between each other. And I was like, this just, and again, that voice in the back of my head at this point is literally screaming, running against, and smacking itself against the back of my brain going, you need to fucking leave. But in the back of my head, I'm like, no, I'm going to be a professional and I'm going to stick it out. And if it doesn't work in a month, I'll give them 2 weeks notice and I'll leave. Going back to the original subject of this video. And Tuesday, walk in. He's like, so did you figure anything out? I hadn't even set my lunch or shit down yet, anything. I was like, and understand too, I brought my lunch, but the moment that was said, I'm like, fuck it, I'm going out to lunch. I didn't care. I did not care. There's a weird zone I get when even if I'm willing to stay at a job, there's a point where I'm like, I'm not gonna handle this shit very well. I need to get the hell out of here. So I remember sitting there for a bit, and and he said, hey, did you take care of the situation? He came over. He walked over from his desk and talked to me. He's like, did you bring your? I don't see your clothing. I was like, no. I got out of here late, and then I didn't really know where to go, and I had to figure out my money thing. Dude, I've been unemployed for like a little while. I got bills to pay. And he goes, yeah, but this is important. This is important. You gotta take care of this. Yeah, dude. And when I get pressed, I'll make snarky comments. I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'll go rob a department store on my lunch break. And I have a very dry sense of humor. And I know that sometimes people, because of what I look like and my size, they sometimes don't get it. Fine. He didn't find that funny. And he's like, well, there's no need for that sort of thing. Well, we're just go ahead and just make sure you get it in here to buy tomorrow. I didn't say shit. I was like, all right. He's like, no, is that a yes or no? And I was like, it's an all right. And I am a very calm person under most circumstances. I just sat down. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna chill out. I'm not even gonna hate. I'm not gonna do anything. But deep inside, there was this little horrible feeling of like, that's what stress, anxiety, and a stroke taste like. Cool. So I sit down and start learning the thing, and then he gets mad because I'm not something happened where he asked me to show him what I'd learned, because me and the lady started joking a little, talking, everything. And then I hear him derisively laugh from behind us. He kind of goes, I kind of look around and he's like, oh, it's a good time. It's a good time. What have you learned? And I remember thinking to myself, like, I was like, Premiere? Adobe Premiere? Oh, really? What do you know? And so he told her to go take a break, which was bizarre. And he sat in her chair, pulled up and said, show me what you know. I was able to open and close a document. I fucked with the timeline a little bit, did some stuff. He's like, oh, okay. I mean, I did pick up some stuff, right? But it wasn't enough for him. He was like, you got to learn to tag him back by the end of the week. I'm going to be having these videos coming in. Now, what got me was, it wasn't like they were off doing a bunch of stuff. And what I tried to figure out, I tried to break the ice. And I remember talking to him and saying, why exactly do I have to bring my church clothing in here? And again, he reiterated, it was just, I didn't trust anyone. And I took it personally because I thought it was directed at me. No, if you went to the bathroom, there was a whole hanger section in there, which was weird. The bathroom was enormous. Toiletries, towels, hair care products, deodorant, like brand new sticks and shit for everybody. He just didn't trust anybody. And over here, there was nice clothing for the secretary, 2 or 3 suits for him, 2 or 3 outfits for the lady that was training me, and then an area that had a divider plastic thing that had my name written on it, and 4 fucking hangers there for whatever the hell. I didn't even know there were that many parts to a suit. Bring that in and leave that there. And I thought, no, I'm not doing that. The moment I saw that, even more resolve built up in me. I'm like, is it too early to give a 2 weeks notice? Can I even make it 2 weeks? So then I blocked out most of Wednesday because that was a shit show of a day. And it's not that I've totally blocked it out. I know I wrote it down because that was one of the angriest days of my life. But I sucked it up and I came back in Thursday. And I need a drink. It's really just soda. I came in Thursday. Like a minute late. He's standing on the front porch. So is this going to be a habit? I was like, no, man, traffic was just bad. I hate lying. I do. I may not always be the most open person, which is why all this shit is so unusual, but it's cathartic. It's a good thing. But I was like, no, man, traffic was bad. Sorry. My apologies. All right. And then I'm walking in and he goes, remember, tag and bag it. And I walked down those damn carpeted stairs, walked past the secretary. She's like, oh, hey, how's it going? I'm like, hey. She was extremely happy to see me, and then the other lady was too. Well, that particular day, they were going out for a shoot for the main client they had. And they were actually going to shoot this commercial. So it was just going to be me and the secretary in there. So for the first, from 9:30 until about 12 o'clock, it's just us in this whole fucking thing. And that's when all hell breaks loose. She starts opening up about, I'm just going to be honest. I'm surprised, that, you've handled things as well as you have. The turnover rate here is so high. We've been through 37 different designers in the last 14 months. There's no word for how that hit me. I was like, are you serious? And she, it was almost like this moment. And I'm going to tell you something real here, because I've been in this circumstance before with other people in other places. I told her, I was like, I don't know a lot about your job, but you're single-handedly handling all the calls, working in Excel, doing all these things, lining up accounts, doing all this other stuff. I know some places that are looking for people with your talent. And I gave her my business card that I had little shitty printed ones. And I said, if you have questions, if you want to leave, you can't. She's like, I can't. We belong to the same church. And, this is kind of something, he's friends with my husband. And I just really can't. And I was like, oh God, no, I got to go. And I was like, and right there, I was like, I think today's my last day. And she looked really downcast. And she's like, oh my God, I'm sorry. Was it something I said? I was like, no, this has been building. I was like, I'm just embarrassed to admit that I'm leaving a job, and I'm quite frankly broke right now. I was like, I don't really know how this is going to go. I mean, because I never clocked in. I was scared this dude was going to shank me out of some hours. But he was enough of a little tightwad that he was no doubt following every tax law to the T. And, payment and all that other shit. Well, they came back and, I'd managed to work on a few things and I showed him and he still wasn't impressed with what I'd done. By this time it's noon and he got pretty mad about the fact that I wasn't really feeling it. But in the back of my head, I'm like, no, if that many people left beforehand, which later I found out 2 friends of mine had interviewed for him and they both were like Nopesville during the interview. And I thought, no, this is horrible, man. This is bad. So I sat there for a while, just staring ahead at my screen. And then I feel him standing behind me. He's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm sorry, man. I was just kind of caught off. And I lied again, which really got to me. And he was like, I'm not paying you to sit here and just stare at the screen and think. That you can work and think. And I was like, dude, I kind of need you to stop, man. And he was like, no, if we stop, we're not making money. Remember, tag and bag. It was that 3rd time he said it that I remember I must have done something weird. I don't know exactly what I did, but he was talking to me and like all I could, when you think you can hear a sound and not like you're fucking high, like, ooh, why do I taste green? Why do I hear blue? Not like that. Like just you check the fuck out. Like at that point, like that person, there are literally, I'm out of fucks. They're all gone. Like nothing's in my pockets. Like I'm done. And I sat there and I thought, no, dude, fuck these 2 weeks. So he said something else. He's like, I'll be back. And so he left. And I thought he left, right? I thought he went somewhere. No. And I turned around and the lady next to me was like, you okay? I was like, no, I'm not. And she was like, I'm sorry, I should have been training. I was like, no, hold on. And I can't remember the secretary's name, but I remember saying, hey, and I talked to both of them like, I'm leaving. This is insane. I'm not going to crap on your guys' jobs here. This dude ain't worth it, man. And I remembered all that resolve I had, all that anger that I had from, other things that had happened in the previous 2 jobs I'd had just kind of came boiling up. And I thought, wow, one company I worked for went bankrupt because of some bad, decisions. And so I got let go. And the previous one, I spoke out on behalf of a bunch of people is really what happened. But I'll get into more of that later, and then got let go because I was considered mouthy. And in those circumstances, I didn't get a chance to do a 2 weeks notice. I got let go. And this one, I couldn't even bring myself to do it. And I was like, I'm sorry for whatever's happening, like as far as me leaving and the workload being bad. And the designer lady, the videographer I was training under was like, no, we go through a lot of people, just reinforcing what the secretary said. So I get all my shit together. I'm like, hopefully I won't run across him. Literally coming up the stairs from the little fucking office dungeon. I said, I'll keep in touch with you guys. I head upstairs. He's on the porch. He's just standing out there. I don't know what he was doing. He was just staring across his little lawn, imagining an empire. I have no idea what he was doing. Just standing out there. I was like, oh, hey. He's like, I'm a little early for lunch, isn't it? I was like, yeah. And I don't even know why this came out. Like, there are times when I'm just like, well, it's time for real talk. I was like, dude, I can't work here. I really can't, man. Like, real talk, I can't do it. You and I, it's like oil and water. I'm much more laid back. I'm not buying a suit. I'm already broke. I literally have $3.64 in my checking account. I have no savings. I got wiped out while trying to just exist and live. I mean, like, all this shit came out. I don't think he was ready for it. And I got real with him. I'm like, I actually hate your client. Like, I can't stand those commercials. And like, I went like way more. It was like oversharing. It was like super fun. He just stood there. He didn't get mad. He didn't say anything. I don't think he'd ever had anyone be direct with him like that before. And I was like, dude, you know what? For what it's worth, man, I just thank you for the opportunity. Sincerely. I wish I was more of a match. I wish you and I kind of were on the same level. Everything else like that. I'm out. Send my check when you can. I totally get it. I trust that you're going to keep your word and I'll get paid and all that other sort of stuff. Good luck, man, with whoever else gets hired here. And I walked off, and I remember I was shaking. I was like, oh, fuck, oh, fuck, oh, fuck. I don't know what I was thinking, but I got in the truck, and I drove, and this wave of relief just like washed over me. And I was like, holy shit. Like, woosah. And I had no regrets about that. That was one where I was like, no. And I wish, though, I'd been able to keep that same sort of manifest of mindset over other circumstances, because, so there was that one. And I promise I won't go into detail with the rest of them. But the other jobs I had after that, when I worked at the card factory, 2 times, it was because of downsizing and reduction in workforce and workloads going away or work being pushed overseas. I lost jobs or contracts ended. That was another common thing. So in a lot of those circumstances, I always felt like, why did I give 2 weeks notice, or, or why would I have wanted to? It just didn't make any sense. I will be absolutely the person last man standing in most circumstances, because I don't like to give up. With the exception of that one job, I don't like to. I'll stay toward the bitter end. I might even offer to work for free for a few days if I really care about the people I'm working for, just because I want to see a project happen. And there have been some startups that I've been involved with that was very much the case. But even though I've never really given a 2 weeks notice in any of the corporate sector aspects, when I did for the cattle ranch and a few other places that I've worked, even hell, a car wash I worked at for a little while, at Aramark, when I worked at the Kansas City Chiefs Stadium for a little while, I took a job for about 1.5 years, and that one I gave my 2 weeks notice. And that was hard too, because the manager I worked for, awesome dude. I'd seen him, become one hell of a boss over the years, worked for him for a couple different places doing security and stuff, and then got a chance to work with him there. And it worked out pretty well for what it was. Very screwball company, man. I could tell horror stories about that shit too. Not him, Aramark. And I'm not ashamed to say that. And I'd love for them to come after me on that one, because the stuff I saw there, just, here's a word to the wise. Just be careful where you guys eat if you go to any stadium, not just with that company, just in general. Just be careful. And good people work for it, but there's some things weird about it, man. And just a lot of stuff that didn't go right. See, I already fucked up. I already said I wasn't going to talk about company names, and boom, there's that. But that one I actually don't give a shit about. That company's messed up. So one thing that was really weird about that was, as I went forward, that one I gave my 2 weeks notice and everything else like that, because I was like, I need to move on. I need to try and figure things out. And I remember thinking to myself, there's no circumstance, like, we're going on 40 minutes. This is insane. There's never been a circumstance where I felt that 2 weeks notice makes sense. And I'm going to explain why when it comes to the corporate sector. Yes, there were people I worked with that I very much, wanted to work with and help out and do all these things with. But that said, there's a point where you also have to realize that a company will let you go, or fire you, or force you to quit with no remorse. The sooner you realize that in 99% of the circumstances out there, you are 100% replaceable, the easier your work life and load becomes. It can be stressful, but I prefer going forward with that knowledge and being a freelancer and understanding that than paying lip service to just keep my job. And there was a lot of circumstances like that. In fact, and that's something I don't really get into too much, but with this last card factory job that I worked at, when I worked there, I never realized that the reason I didn't get let go was because if I did, I could claim unemployment. Instead, my hours got reduced down from working at one point almost 40 to 50 hours a week, which at that pay rate was insane paychecks. I think at my height, I may have been making right around $38 or $35 an hour, and it wasn't hard work at all. I can't go into the specifics about it, That much I have respect for. I'm not going to do that. But it was pretty easy work, pretty monotonous work, but it was pretty easy work. And then there was, and this is when I was working contract, not when I was full time. And then there was also whenever, that happened, then all of a sudden everything started to break down. This is pre-COVID. So money wasn't coming into the company like they thought. There was a lot of things being talked about. Layoffs were happening. All this other shit was going down. So the next thing that happened was I ended up in a circumstance where by the time everything was done and said, it went from being 40, 50 hours a week to about 20 hours a week. And then it got reevaluated every like 3 to 6 months. Well, are you okay with 15 hours a week? Okay, well, we need you to kind of stick to around 8 hours a week. By the time it was done, I was working from home on a laptop and had to check in. I had to email every week and basically be like, do I still work here? There were weeks that went by that I didn't. And this was about the same time that I ended up working. Now this was the one that I did end up giving. I take it back. I did finally give a 2 weeks notice when I worked at the Nelson Atkins Museum during COVID. So I was kind of working between the two jobs. And when I say working for the card factory, it was, and so I got down to like where they were having me work. I think it was 2.5 hours. That was the last email approval I got, was I could never go over 2 or 2.5 hours a week. Even at $37 an hour, which I only saw a little bit of that because the internal recruitment group got a percentage of that. That's not a lot. I was making under $70 a week. It was freaking terrifying. And I had built up a little bit of savings, but nothing to weather that. And, with COVID and everything else happening, I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen. And so I happened across an interview opportunity to go and be internal security for the Nelson. If you've ever been to the Nelson Atkins, it is not the people you see walking the grounds. It is not the people you see in the little purple suits and stuff. I was one of the dudes behind the scene, which was a very rare, wonderful opportunity. And even though it had its ups and downs, and I did end up quitting there, there were moments in that time that are phenomenal. And that'll be another story too, if you guys want to hear about it. So then there was a lot of times whenever I thought about this, because when I left the card factory, no, I almost slipped and said it. I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, this was one where that was a very weird circumstance, and I'll end it with this story, okay? So I often thought to myself, they're doing the best they can. I'm trying to survive through this, and I've told this story before. So if you guys follow me on social media, pardon me, I'll go a little more in detail and still keep it vague on this one. It's like vague posting on Facebook. It's like, you wouldn't believe how much I hate you. So basically, in a nutshell, like I had mentioned earlier, I used to have a laptop that I would keep here at home and work, and then it would consistently, there were protocol issues with it. There was all kinds of things. Just, it wasn't working very well. Finally managed, because they were so limited on who could go in and all these other things, I finally managed to get an IT connection point where I was able to go and have a moment to go into part of the building and meet up with IT, who was near the outskirts of the building. Otherwise, you had no access to anything else in there, like most places at that time. When I showed up, I had just earlier, right before everything closed down, I had interviewed for another position, and it was in a creative area. And I was really looking forward to possibly getting into it, because I had interviewed with the lady who was the creative art director, I believe, over it. I think that was her title. And then I had a few people that I knew that worked in there. One of my really good friends worked in there as well too. And then I was just really excited. I've been learning a lot of skill sets that would have helped me get into this particular area. And then, so what happened was that I take this in, and then the guy I spoke to, I didn't know him, but I knew his name. And we're talking back and forth. And he's like, hey man, how's it going? And I was like, oh, it's going good and everything else like that. And he's like, I've seen you around before. And I'm like, yeah, I've seen you too, and all those other things. It was like, you were doing IT now? It's like, oh man. He's like, I used to do creative and I don't want to do it anymore. He was like, it's so much better just doing freelance IT. I'm like, oh, that's rad, dude. Jumping around like that, freaking amazing. I totally back that. So we get to talking and, just talking about normal work stuff and everything else like that. A lot of details I'm going to leave out on that. So, he starts telling me, he's like, man, you wouldn't believe it. So there's this whole thing that happens because we were talking about crazy stuff at work. And I told him how my hours have been reduced down to like nothing really, like $70 worth of hour or $70 worth of work a week. And he was like, oh man, that's terrible. He's, they're hiring though. And I was like, yeah, I know. I was like, I put in for a position, but so what's been going on in your world? And he goes, oh man, he goes, yeah, I hope you get that position. But he was like, you know what? I got this weird thing. There was a person that started a job. And he went into this and he's telling me, he gets this weird phone call. And it's to him about a new hire. And I believe it was a manager. Somebody had called him on behalf of this person, said, I'm sending somebody down and they're going to need some help with a computer. And that was all he was told. So he opens the ticket and everything else like that. And he's like, all right, cool. They end up coming down there and he's like, okay, well, what can I help you with? And they said, I need to learn the Adobe Creative Suite. I've got about 45 minutes. I thought I misheard him. And he's like, man, it was crazy. He's like, I'm like, have you got 4 years? There's no way. What are you trying to learn? So it wasn't just the Adobe Creative Suite. They had to learn how to render in 3D and some other things and stuff like that. They just wanted kind of a quick once over. There's no way you can't give anyone even the rudimentary understanding and knowledge of it, considering, and I want to let me preface this all, let me go back and retroactively preface all this. This was not a person from creative. As it turns out, the person over the creative head of this group that I had been trying to interview for was an accountant. There's a certain problem I have when companies will allocate that an accountant or somebody who doesn't have any real artistic background but can bean count will take that initiative and then rule that roost. And in the back of my head, I'm like, no fucking way. And so he goes on to explain that this person got hired in that group. They got the job that I had put in for. Now, I didn't only feel bad for me. I felt bad for every other creative that did not get this position. And I remember looking at him. He's like, isn't that crazy? I never even bothered to tell him that I had put in for that job. And yeah, it turned out that she explained to him, it was a lady that got the job from what I understand, that her friend was the accountant over this group and had gotten her into the job. And I'll end with this. That was the weirdest feeling. So guys, if you're watching this, understand, like I said earlier, I'm somebody who tries to stay. I try not to give up, right? Because being an artist is hard as shit. It's hard being taken seriously creative. It's hard putting your stuff out on a table. It's hard creating something new and original and hoping to God somebody's going to be like, hey, that's cool. Because I've always said, I'll even take a bad reaction. Good, bad reaction, that's fantastic. No reaction, horrible. And speaking of no reaction, I didn't really have one. I felt kind of dead inside. I remember he said some other things. We talked for a little bit longer, and I was like, that is crazy, man. I got my laptop. I walked out the door. There's an elevator that took me up to I think it was the 4th area in the parking garage. I walked, what I didn't realize for the last time, down to my truck. And I got in my truck, and there's so few people that were at the place that, I parked, and if you park up high, the brick facade there, the wall, you can see through it and kind of look across, and you can look across and see different like local locations. I'm about to give them I was like, if I talk too much, I'm like, well, I know exactly where this is according to the GPS that he's talking about. Shit. So anyway, I end up sitting there, and I seriously it was one of those moments where I'm like, God, you're a fucking idiot, aren't you? All this regret, man, all this anger and pissiness just came forward. And I was like, I quit. I'm done. Now, fuck 2 weeks. So I drove home. Right here, actually where this computer is sitting now, I set the laptop on this elevated desk. I stared at it. I opened it, And I wrote an email to my boss and said, I'm out. I didn't say anything bad. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't my other boss's fault. It wasn't. Copied everybody I needed to on there. Let my other really good friend know that I was like, hey, dude, I'm out. I can't, man. I'm like, the hours are killing me. And they understood. They actually did understand. And there was nothing they could do. They had been trying to get me back more hours, but that was just not the corporate decree. And, you know, it just boggled my mind how quickly that whole thing set in for me. And I was like, I'm done. I'm out. And it hurt because then I was like, man, I feel weird. I should have just left the laptop there. I would save some gas. And I don't, I mean, like at that point, I was still working at the Nelson. So I had time, I had money coming in, but I had just started. So I still had to wait like 2 weeks to get paid. I believe it was what it was. And, it wasn't going to be near as much money. Not even remotely. That's nothing against Nelson. Security in general just never gets paid very well. I don't care if you're working in an entertainment district or you're doing it on the side. Unless you're a cop that carries a gun and you do after-hours security work, I think most of those guys make around 30. If you're working for some of the bigger agencies like Pinkerton, you might make around 20. I don't know that for certain. But for most, especially for museums and stuff like that, you can expect to make somewhere between 10 to like 13 an hour. And so I remember thinking, well, I'll be okay. It's not going to be great. The hours are going to be weird, and my creative output is going to take a crunch. I wish I'd known now what I known back then and had been promoting a lot of my stuff and even talking about the place there, but that, such was not the case. Nonetheless, that was one where I didn't give 2 weeks notice, but the last real job I had, I gave 2 weeks notice at, which was the Nelson. Because it was about a week and a half, actually, right before they were going to start bringing people back in. I just didn't feel comfortable, and there was a lot of circumstances, not just COVID. I was like, I don't think this is going to work. There was a lot of personal and professional issues I was having just keeping up and then being able to do shows. It just wasn't conducive to what I wanted to do in life, and I had to make that decision. And after years of having worked at different places, I finally told myself, no, you've got to tell them that. You've got to say, I can't make it. I can't do this anymore. And it sucked because the vast majority of people I worked with there, I really enjoyed. And you better believe there were some definite bonuses. I can go into this more in another one, but it was some of the best shape I'd been in my life. You walk like 13 or 15 miles a night, covering the grounds and doing all this other stuff. And then so much of what I learned, the things I had seen there, like just, it was pretty wild. It was a lot of fun. And it's a trip to walk around on the grounds at night and to there's some stuff again there I legally cannot talk about, but there was a lot of stuff that was really a blast. And probably the best thing was I have a medal. So if you guys don't know about this stuff, there's a medal. I didn't get it from the Nelson. That sounded super crazy. I need to explain that really quick. So there is a program completely separate call. I believe it's called the Conqueror Medals or something, but there's different themed ones. There are these huge enamel ones. I would go and grab it right now, but it's all hanging up and everything. And I had one that I got because I had downloaded the software. There's an app for it. And they have some really badass Lord of the Rings ones. And so they're virtual. So basically, you walk every single day and you, using a pedometer or the app or whatever, you measure how much you walk. And when you're done, they ship you this beautiful medal. It's like $30 per medal or something. And they're massive. They're just wonderful looking things. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is so freaking cool. Because I worked there for the 3 to 4 months that the Nefertari exhibit was stuck there. They couldn't ship it back to Egypt. I'm not going to get in trouble for saying this. This was something they talked about. And I also got to see a lot of really other cool things along with that. But every single night I worked, I got a chance to walk through Egypt. And this is not like light stuff. There were huge stone effigies and statues and papyrus and jewelry. It was creepy as shit though, because you're walking around in the dark. And like, I got my flashlight. Like, I'd seen Night of the Museum and the Mummy movies way too many times, but it was really rad. It was very cool. And every time I walked through there, I added up the miles, and then I was like, you know what? I'm walking every single night in the museum, and I am walking through Egypt because I had another Egyptian. If you're familiar with the Nelson, they have another Egyptian area. So I just started counting up all the miles, and I finally got that medal I got right after I finished, and I gave my 2 weeks notice. I placed the order for the medal, and right about the time, yeah, it took about 2 weeks to ship to me. And when I got done, it came to me. So it was really cool. You know what? Let me just grab it really quick here. Okay, this is it right here. So this is the Conqueror's Medal. And what's cool about this is it also has this sign on the back. It is actual cast metal. So this part, tell me this isn't something out of the mummy, opens up, and the scarab beetle is this little element that comes out of the center. It goes back together, closes up, and then the rest of it is really cool as well too. But so this was walking the area of the Giza pyramids for the Conqueror medal. So it's a virtual challenge. I recommend doing them. They're kind of fun. I'm going to sign up for some more as soon as I can afford to get the ones I want. They have all kinds, like Mount Fuji. They introduced the very first fantasy ones, the Lord of the Rings ones. Freaking amazing. And they've even got nicer ways to display it than the nail that I have mine hanging on. Anyway, so that was at least one happy ending. So see, we did end on a positive note. That was a circumstance where, no, I didn't bring a lot of vitriol with me on that. It was like, it was what it was. No job is perfect. But the whole point of this entire video was this. I believe that if you have a reason that you need to leave a job, that you need to move onward, that you need to do things, do not let the 2-week aspect stop you. Companies have the resources in most cases to replace you the next day. I don't mean to bring anyone down. That is not my point. I do want you to understand and realize that life has a lot more availability for growth and for experiences and for chances to prove yourself to yourself. And that's invaluable. And waiting 2 weeks just so that a corporation, a company, whatever, can find a replacement for you that you often end up training is not great. But it is what it is. God, I never thought I was going to do an hour one of this, and now it's going to be real fun uploading this thing. Thanks for watching, guys. For those of you that watched it all the way to the end, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm going to try and tell more stories like this, albeit in a 15-minute zone that kind of cover this sort of thing. This was a nice trip down memory lane for me. And I got a few interesting questions and some emails on other things I'm going to cover as well too. So hopefully you guys will join me for those as well too. Until the next time, take care and remember the worth you have.